denying. Both men were set to spend 16 years in a Russian prison. Joining us right now with more insight and analysis in terms of what we are watching play out at this hour is Peter Doran. He's adjunct senior fellow of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. First of all, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I want to start with your thoughts on the release and specifically the timing of this prisoner swap.
Well, thank you for having me. This is great news for the families of Americans who are going to be able to welcome their loved ones back. So it is wonderful news that these hostages are being released from Russian prisons. They were held there illegally. So that's the good news. The question is, how much did the Biden administration have to pay for this release? It was clear for several weeks now that the Biden administration had set a priority to free these American hostages who were being held illegally in Russia. What is unknown at this point is what was the swap? What were the terms of the swap? Who did we or our allies give up in order to make this exchange happen?
Yes, we know that the families were just at the White House not long ago. In fact, that was something that we had on Merritt Street as well. Peter, you know, interesting, too, we're not just talking about U.S. civilians who are involved in the swap. There are other people from foreign countries as well. So a lot of people may think, well, this is just a U.S. political play happening right before an election, but it's international as well. So I'm kind of wondering about the implications of all of that.
Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that America still has the ability to work with our allies in other countries to get things done. This was clearly a priority for National Security Advisor to President Biden, Jake Sullivan, and his team. They went on record just a few weeks ago saying that the release of these hostages would occur before Biden left office at the end of the year. So they were working this issue very hard. That's the good news, that we released these hostages. But also, there is an element of American weakness here. Remember, in December of 2022, when Russia released another American hostage, a high-profile basketball player, within 4 months, they took Mr. Gershkovich. So Russia has clearly identified there is a price that America and its allies will pay to release hostages. And what we're seeing right now is that price is being paid for these additional Americans.
It's interesting you bring up the price, and Peter, you know, America has long since had a stance: we do not pay for prisoners. We are so grateful, we are so thankful that these prisoners are returning home, like you said, to be with their families, because there's been a lot of stress over this, and there's been a lot of concern for their safety, how they've been treated in those Russian prisons. But if we do find out that the Biden administration paid for this prisoner swap, what are the larger ramifications to us as a nation, but also internationally?
Well, we already have the answer to that, and it's known as the Shultz Doctrine. Recall, Mr. Shultz was President Reagan's Secretary of State, and back when Reagan was considering a swap for American hostages in Lebanon, Secretary of State Shultz said, "Mr. President, if you do this, you will put a price on the head of every American in the world." And guess what happened? Reagan was able to release some hostages, but very bad people in the world took more. That's what we saw in the case of Russia just last year in 2023, when Mr. Gershkovich was taken hostage after the release of an additional hostage. We've seen other examples in the case of Iran. So again, it is great that these Americans are being released and they're coming home. What we do not know is what the terms of those releases were. Who did we give up? What kind of very bad people in the prisons of the world did we give up in order to spring this release? So it's good news and bad news. Ultimately, though, I don't like putting a price on the heads of Americans.
Yes. Well, and to your point, you know, we've been talking about the timing of all of this. And yes, what a relief to these families to finally get their loved ones back home. But again, the timing of it all, a lot of people thinking, you know, are you using my family member as a political ploy leading up to an election cycle? So much to be learned throughout this story, Peter, but we thank you for your insight. And we hope to have you back on Morning on Merit to further the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.